Ladies and gentlemen, dear international friends, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me to talk in this very international forum. Um, I'm a Dane with heart and mind, but I'm also a Scandinavian. My parents were born in Sweden, both of them, and in fact, I still speak Swedish, which very few Danes do. But I learned it as a small kid, playing around in Sweden just after the Second World War. So I really feel quite Scandinavian. Um, I was a little bit surprised about your remark that we should see the Scandinavian languages as a dialect of the German. I have never thought about that. I don't think I speak rather good German, and I'm married to a German lady. But my Danish is not a dialect of German. Well, you can find some words, but you can also find very many Anglo-Saxon words in Danish, and also in the other Scandinavian countries. So it's not only a Germanic influence; it's an Anglo-Saxon influence of the language. But that's another story. Um, I would like to begin with a few of my own experiences in Germany. I have very long experiences in this country. I've been here altogether 32 years. It's a long time, and 22 years of those we have been in Berlin. So I could almost say, like John F. Kennedy did in the 60s, Ich bin ein Berliner. I'm not. As I say, I'm a Dane with heart and mind. I was a Danish diplomat for 30 years, earning my money around the world and enjoying that very, very much. I was not a cultural diplomat, but I've always been interested in cultural things and issues. Just to see my sort of time in Germany, I started in Munich in 1967. That's a few days ago, where I opened the first Danish official office. In the first place in the SAS office. And why that? Because the director of SAS in Munich at that time, he was an honorary Danish consul. Then we moved after a while, and we had an honorary consulate in Munich, which we had many, many years, and I worked in the same offices with them, and we developed it into a consulate general, which is now turned into a trade office, in fact, but we're still represented in Munich. It was an awfully exciting time in Munich for a young Dane. It was it was the center of the American sector in Germany at that time, and you really could feel the American influence in Munich at that time, in industry, in culture, and a lot of, I can recall Texas Instruments had its European head office in Munich in those days. And the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham, I was a member there. It was a very interesting organization, which we all like to visit. Other than that, there were some exciting, huge building projects in Munich. They were building the underground in Munich in those days, in the 60s. They were building the town hall square underneath Marienplatz and Stachus, which is also a huge area underground. And of course, they were building all the preparations and buildings and stadiums for the Olympic Games 1972. I had, in those days, also a very close collaboration with the Danish embassy in Bonn. We were, as all the nations in those days, we were in Bonn, and that sort of helped me in my future career also, that I had been working well with the Danish Foreign Service. I can also recall the 1968, the Prager Frühling, the revolution against the communists in Prague, which was very, very exciting for all us. And I went in my Volvo twice to Prague with my Danish girlfriend, which was a bit crazy, I thought. we just drove to Prague, and the first night we didn't have a hotel room, so we slept in the Volvo, and we had the Dannebrog, the Danish flag, over us. It was a bit adventurous. In 1969, I remember, that was a moon landing. Neil Armstrong landed as the first American on the moon, and that was very exciting for us young men in those days. It was a small step for man and a giant step for mankind, as you know. Well, in 1970, I joined the Foreign Service in Copenhagen, but in 72, I decided to go to the Olympic Games in Munich again, not as participant, but as a spectator. I had left Munich when the PLO had this disastrous attack of the Israeli athletes. I don't know if you know or remember this, but that was a shock for the world, and not least for the Germans. In the summer I was then 9 years in the Danish Foreign Office overseas. I was in Montreal and Hong Kong. But in the summer of '74, I was in Munich again. The Danish Queen was official visit in Munich, and I was invited to an event in Kloster Andechs. That's a very famous German cloister. What's that called in English? Cloister? Monastery, yes. Thank you very much. Monastery, Andechs. And the purpose of that visit was, among others, that she should meet all the Danes in Munich. And I was invited there, and a lot of others, and it was a very warm summer day, just like today here. We were sweating, and that's where I met my first wife, Suzanne. She lived in Munich and had lived there for many years. The year after, we married in Montreal in the Danish Immigrant Church there. So that was a bit of a romantic Olympic story. In 1994, I was in the meantime divorced. I got the job as a consul and trade commissioner with the Consulate General in Hamburg. That was some very exciting and exciting and workful years. Denmark's role and interests in Hamburg have always been very important. For many hundred years, the Danish kingdom actually went all the way down to Altona, which is a suburb of Hamburg. And Altona means allzu-nah, all too near. So both on the cultural side and the economic side in Hamburg, lots of things happened, and lots of things are still happening in Hamburg. Here I met my second wife, Isabel, a hamburger. Well, a real hamburger. She's sitting here. Thank you. And we met at a fine dinner party with her girlfriend, who had told her that she should meet, or she was to meet, a Danish consul. And Isabel had thought, well, why should I meet a consul? Well, what shall I do with a Danish consul? However, it was the beginning of a very well and very nice escape. Excuse me, I'm mixing all the languages up. Thank you. In 1990, it was finished with a post in Hamburg, and we moved to Copenhagen, to Christianshavn, whom you might know. It's an old part of Copenhagen, and we got a very old apartment at the Christianshavn Channel, only 5 minutes from the Foreign Office. I was very happy about that. In 1992, it was my turn again, and I really wanted to get to Sydney. That was my big dream. I wanted to be a consul general in Sydney. However, the Sydney job was changed before my time, and it was not suitable at the time. Then there was another interesting job coming up at the as a sous chef and consul at the Danish Consulate General in the United Berlin. We're talking about 92, a little more than 2 years after the fall of the wall and the German reunification. And I thought that would be very interesting. And I had my German experiences. I had my German wife. I was speaking the language reasonably good, and Isabel was happy. We were watching this enormous development. I don't know, you're not Berliners here, but I can tell you, the Berlin in 1992 didn't look like it does today. Potsdamer Platz, for example, was just one big dirty field. There was nothing there, nothing. And there were other places in Berlin where there was also nothing. At the Pariser Platz, there was no American embassy or Hotel Adlon or anything. It's all happened in these 22 years. So we followed this cultural development also, this with music, arts, exhibitions, events, sports, and everything else. I was working at the Consulate General unter den Linden, which was our former embassy in the GDR. The Nordic embassies were not yet here, so all the Nordic countries had their consulate generals in the United Berlin. We built up the mission, and we employed several local people so that we could work with the many new Danish interests in the city, building companies, architects, furniture companies, banks, and a lot of other. We worked with the many Danish subsidiaries. I think we had 70 subsidiaries or more in those days. It has shrunk enormously. We don't have so many Danish subsidiaries here. They're all in Western Germany. A few interesting, exciting stories I would like to mention to you, which you may not be aware of. For example, I was invited to the goodbye parade of the Allied troops in Berlin in 1994, after their presence here for almost 50 years. It was a huge military parade on the Straße der 17. Juni with Americans, French, and English. And the Americans, they were wearing battle uniforms and steel helmets. And I asked the American commander in those days, why were you wearing these battle dresses? Well, he said, we were here to make war. So, but there was no war, thank you very much. Thank God for that. The British left also, and they left the British Officers Club, which was a famous place, which was turned into the International Club Berlin, which I'm still a member of. In 1994, also our Queen was on an official visit here, and we were all invited to a dinner, enormous sort of fest dinner in Charlottenburg Schloss with more than 100 people. Many things happened in Berlin those days, and I'm very pleased that I was a witness, that I could do something for Danish interests here. Denmark was very, very interested in the new United Berlin, not only economically, but also culturally. In 1996, I withdrew from the Danish Foreign Service in order to stay in Berlin. However, I continued my work, intensive work with Danish interests and companies. In 1994, I became a representative of the worldwide Danish club of foreign Danes worldwide, where our Queen is a protector. In 1998, I became Goodwill Ambassador for Copenhagen, and what is that? Well, Copenhagen is my state of birth, and I know my city very well. I had, in those days, hundreds of contacts there, and goodwill ambassadors are working for wonderful Copenhagen, the tourist organization of Copenhagen, and Copenhagen Capacity, the industrial marketing association of Copenhagen. And we did a lot of things here. We made exhibitions and lectures, and it was great fun. And in 1992, we even made a city cooperation agreement between Berlin and Copenhagen, a city partnership, which was signed by the two Lord Mayors in the Rathaus von Berlin. In 1998, also Bill Clinton was here. I'll never forget that. He was here because of the 50 years for the Allied airlift to Berlin in 1947-48, where the Allied saved Berliners by bringing them everything they could eat, drink, and heat with for almost 2 years. And there was a big ceremony in the Tempelhofer airport. Kohl was there, U.S. military orchestra, veteran pilots, the old original Dakota aircrafts were there, and I recall Clinton also made a fantastic speech. He was a real good speaker. And he also made a speak at Brandenburger Tor, just open, with 10,000 people on Pariser Platz. He was saying the words, "Berlin ist frei." That was in remembrance of John F. Kennedy many years ago. Then there was also a visit here a few years later, after 9/11 in the United States, where George W. Bush was here. But he didn't seek the contact with the people. He only had high security in the head. The Pariser Platz was totally blocked out, and he was living in Hotel Adlon, and one evening he was invited for a dinner in the Tucher on the other side, and he was walking across the Pariser Square. There was absolutely nobody there. The third American president I have witnessed here is Obama. Two times, his first famous speech for 300,000 people at the Siegessäule, just before he became president, and the second time on the Pariser Platz again in 2010, where he was speaking behind glass shooting glass safety glasses. I also had the pleasure to arrange the first Echo Walkathon marathon running in Berlin. Echo is a Danish shoe manufacturer who have this promotional marathon, and we had Wovereit as a protector. We had start and end at the Brandenburger Tor with a huge scenery, and 7,000 Berliners was running the walkathon marathon. This was the only time, however, that we could run from and to the Brandenburger Tor. 1999 was a very exciting year for the Scandinavian presence in Berlin. The Nordic embassies were opened. It's an imposing joint Nordic project with 5 individual embassies on one address and a Nordic Gemeinschaftshaus, common house. If you have time or interest, I can only recommend you to visit the Nordic embassies. I have some brochures laid out downstairs at the reception. the Nordic embassies in Berlin, a very neat description of what it is. And also at this time, they have an event called Play Nordic, Music, Design and Cafe in the Nordic embassies in the Fælleshus, in the joint house of the Scandinavian countries. It was a world premiere to open these Gemeinschaftshaus. Nowhere else in the world have 5 democracies joined as a joint embassy project. Our Queen Margrethe was opening the project at a very, very wonderful party because she was the oldest head of state. At the open house on the first Saturday, there were 15,000 guests in the project. The project of the Nordic embassies have was from all parties in Germany. It was very sort of highly discussed, and everybody thought it was a great idea. In the Gemeinschaftshaus, they have Scandinavian exhibitions. There are lectures, there are discussions, there are concerts, and even with, as I say, Nordic musicians. In Berlin, we also have a Danish menighed. What's that?
Diaspora.
Yes, diaspora.
I call it diaspora.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A Danish Gemeinde, a church,
They
which is called the Christianskirche. Last year we could celebrate 100 years Christian's church in Berlin, and this Gemeinde has survived 2 world wars in Berlin, bombs, and the divided city. Even in the GDR time, the church tried to serve the members of the community in East Berlin also. There's been a very positive development in the recent years in the Danish church here. To the 100 years anniversary, there was made a wonderful book about the community through 100 years called Living Stones, with interviews with many of the members of the Danish community. The book looks like this, and it's colored with interviews and photos of about 70, 80 persons that have been there for many years, and new ones. I can't give it, it's in Danish, but I just, if anybody wants to have a look at it, I can put it out there. Well, a few remarks to the relations Germany-Denmark. There hasn't always been peace and understanding between our 2 neighboring countries. Many wars have taken place in southern Jutland and Schleswig-Holstein. After the Napoleonic Wars, as Norman also talked about, we had the Peace of Kiel in 1815, where Denmark lost Norway and southern Sweden, but we could keep Greenland and the Faroe Islands, which we still have. In 1948, in 1848 to 50, there was another war again, and Denmark got Schleswig-Holstein under the Königreich, under the country. In 1964, there was for Denmark a terrible war again, which we lost in the famous Battle of Düppeler Schanze to Preußen and Austria. Denmark at that time lost about 1/3 of its area, which was a disaster. The border went up to Kolding, the city of Kolding, way up in middle Jutland, and it was a a real trauma for the Kongeriget Denmark. It was not until the peace negotiations after the World War I, which Denmark was not active in, that we got southern Jutland back to a border with Tønder and Flensborg, which is now still valid. During the Second World War, as you have already heard, Nazi Germany occupied Denmark from April 1940 till 1945. In the last 2 years, there was a very active resistance fight after the Danish government had been neglected by the Germans, and there was no Danish government left, and the Germans tried to catch all the Danish Jews. And you know, this was a terrible thing in Europe, and there was also Jews in Denmark. And through a very admirable action by the Danish population, more than 7,000 Jews were shipped over to Sweden. And that was in 1943, and we were very thankful to Sweden in those days. Even my own father was engaged in that, so it was a very, very tricky situation. After the Second World War, dear friends, the German-Danish border has been totally peaceful. And with the EU cooperation, it has become quite open. There is absolutely no controls nowadays at the Danish-German border. If you go to Flensborg on a Saturday afternoon, half of the population is there, Danes, talking Danes and shopping. I've always said that our common border between Denmark and Germany now could be a very good example of the new open limits, new open borders in the European Union. A few facts about, I don't know, have I a little bit more time maybe. A few facts about Denmark. The World Bank had just published a new survey about the richest countries in the world. Denmark advanced 2 places to the 7th place among the world's GDP per capita, with whole $58,930 per capita. This is not bad, I think, and we can be very proud about that. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and Mr. Norman has also mentioned the Scandinavian way of having economy and paying taxes and getting something for paying taxes and so on. I can only confirm that. The whole country has 5.6 million inhabitants. Copenhagen is the capital with 1.8 million. The language is Danish, and English is the most important foreign language. As you said, German is not the language anymore in Denmark, although before the world wars, it was quite a cultural language in Denmark. It is not no longer the case, and that has, of course, also to do with the internet and the digital world, which is all in English. The realm of Denmark, the Königreich, what was it? The monarchy, yeah. Thank you. The monarchy is the oldest in the world. It's more than 1,000 years, and there's been no revolutions, no communists, no Nazis, and everything. And it's a constitutional monarchy with Queen Margrethe as the head of state since 42 years. The currency is called the krone. 1 euro is approximately 7 kroner 45. Denmark has twice, with a public voting, said no thank you to the euro. The Danes didn't want to have the euro. But we have tied our exchange rate of the kroner to the euro with 2.5% up or 5% down. So it's a very stable currency. Denmark has been a member of the EU since 1972, where Britain also joined. And Denmark has, not least after the Second World War, had big ties with Britain, with the United Kingdom, also on economic sides, but also on the mentality. General Montgomery was a freer was a liberator of Denmark in 1945. I remember seeing General Montgomery driving through Copenhagen, and that was, of course, a very popular time for Great Britain. Since 1948, we've been NATO members, and Denmark has been very involved in these organizations, just like we've been very involved in the United Nations, just like Norman told you also. The Secretary General of NATO for the last 4 years is a Dane, a former Prime Minister, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, and his successor will also be a Scandinavian, namely the former Prime Minister of Norway, Jens Stoltenberg. The region about Øresund around Copenhagen is today called One Destination, Two Countries, after the inauguration of the famous bridge over Øresund. We have a 16-kilometer long joint between Copenhagen and Malmö. This is one of the longest bridge connections in the world and very successful. It was finished in 2000, and people were very reluctant, but the traffic over the bridge, railway and cars, is huge, and it's very popular. Many Danes have houses in Sweden because it's cheaper to buy houses in Skåne than it is in Copenhagen, and many Swedes work in Copenhagen because you earn good money there. So that's a real success. The Copenhagen airport is just at the one side of the bridge, and it is one of the most important international hubs in Northern Europe, with 27 million passengers per year. The region is a regional supported by the EU. It has 21,000 square kilometers. It has 3.5 million inhabitants, 20 universities, 150,000 students, and a GPD per head is one of the highest in Europe. A very actual, very new report, information report in Germany has shown that Denmark and Germany are the biggest winners of the European common market. The growing European integrations since the start of the common market in 1992 has benefited Denmark and Germany with regard to the durchschnittliche average income raise per citizen. 250 euro per year in Germany per person, and 500 euro in Denmark per person per year. Well, let me finish with some experiences and observations about differences and similarities between Germans and Danes. Germany is, of course, a much larger and more differentiated society than Denmark. Traditionally, a big resource-based heavy industry and large concentration of capital. The Germans have much more hierarchies everywhere, even in soccer. They have more authoritarian thinking at home in politics and in business. That's my experience. My experience is also that the Germans are much more combative and quarrelsome, more direct, and confronting than the Danes are. Contrary to the Danes, the Germans can be very precise in communication and business conditions. They also go to court more often than Danes. The German society reflects the more complicated nature of the German person. The lack of courage, I think, too much anxiety, too little innovativeness, and even more lobbyism than in Denmark is the case. Here are some of my other observations about the Germans. They take no risks. They insist on their rights. The unique expression of Dienst nach Vorschrift is very German. They will wait at the red traffic light, even at 3 o'clock in the morning. They do not talk in the underground and in buses. They will only talk to people they know already. Small talk is almost unknown. They don't like to take the first step of talking. The Germans keep their feelings to themselves and are often reserved. Spontaneity is often difficult, alone because of the du or sie in the German language. We have it more easy in Scandinavia. We say do to everybody. The Swedes started and the Danes adopted the do to everybody in the early 1980s, where I came back from the Far East and I was shocked. Even in the Danish television, everybody was saying do to each other. I was shocked, but I do it now today. I do everybody. So in fact, they are not generally a communicative people. If you finally get to know the Germans, it's different. However, there are big differences in Germany. I can sign that from north to south. In Bavaria, it's a bit difficult. It's a bit different than it is in northern Germany. Now, a few remarks to the Danes. The Danes are generally for collaboration instead of confrontation. In the field of works and politics, they look for consensus and compromises, even in the Danish Folketing, in the Danish parliament. Sometimes too lax and counterproductive. They work for someone and with someone, not under someone. Anti-hierarchic attitudes tend to solve problems informally and friendly through talking and personal contact. The consensus mentality often turns into an avoiding conflict attitude, conflict shyness. My German wife often confirms this. The Danes tend to overvalue themselves. World champions at home, rather provincial abroad. Janteloven is a Danish expression, still exists. It says, do not think you are someone special. Do not think you are better than anyone else. The Danes are not religious, rather pragmatic. However, recent problems with certain immigrants have appeared. It's a very homogeneous society. The Danish industry, strongly developed only after the Second World War, is widely in Danish hands. A small society without any natural resources and little heavy industries, the Danes have widely avoided industrial colonization and foreign capital control. The original Danish reluctance and skepticism against the EU in the 1960s and 70s, which was sometimes referred to as the Club of 3Ks, Catholics, Christ Democrats, and capitalists. We have survived that. I think that the Danes today are rather EU friendly, although we don't have the euro, but we have the open borders. We are very active in Brussels, in all gremiums. We are very active in NATO. So our general attitude, I think, in the new generations have changed. Our society has helped been able to produce new, innovative, and progressive business leaders and have successfully avoided the master-servants attitude in other large capitalist countries. So Denmark today is a loyal but critical and democratic member of the new EU. Let me give you some more personal observations on behavior and communication which I've experienced along the road. In the elevator in a big department store, the silence. The Danish patients in the German hospital in Rostock, do to everybody. The common exchange of business cards, no follow-up actions. An American example at the cashier, smile. I don't have to. And I admire the capability of the German people to listen to long speeches. Often less is more. The Danes have a lot of goodwill in Germany. Also the other Scandinavians, they often do not know how to profit from it. The opposite is not the case. The Danes behave, communicate, and dress wrongly in Germany. The Germans know very little substantially about the Danes and the country. The modest media coverage on both sides, newspapers, television, and internet, is example of that. There's a language problem in Denmark. We don't synchronize films. We have films in all original languages, in English and French, not in Chinese, however. But the story of the ugly chap in the party, you know, who gets all the attention, has something to do with optimism, humor, friendliness, ready wit, the direct eye contact, the ability to listen, and maybe a certain natural modesty, but self-confidence. Dear friends, let me finish now with a very well-known Danish poem by the poet Piet Hein. Denmark seen from foreign land is but like a grain of sand. Denmark as we Danes conceive it is so big you won't believe it. Why not let us compromise about Denmark's proper size? It will truly please us all, since it's greater than it's small. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over here.
Yeah.
In the front.
Okay.
For your lecture, it was very interesting. I wanted to ask you, since the topic of the lecture was German, Scandinavian, and Danish connections, if you could give some concrete examples of how perhaps Germany, after World War II, tried to improve relations with countries that may be affected by the event. And if you don't think of any, could you propose some, especially cultural diplomacy interventions a country could do with the other countries that were affected by an event like this?
I think the Germans have done quite a lot after the Second World War to improve relations. I know many German families in the 1950s and 60s who spent their summer holidays in Denmark with their kids. And these kids are today grown up, and they always speak very positive about Denmark and about their experiences there. I think also that the Danes are frequent tourists in Germany, not only in Hamburg, which is a big and very close tourist place, but also southern Germany, also for skiing, for example, and Berlin. The Danes have really discovered Berlin after the fall of the wall. We have many Danes here. We don't know how many because it's EU people. We think maybe 4,000 or 5,000. Many have bought apartments here, and my impression is that there's a good cooperation with the Berliners and the Danes. Well, I think German culture has been promoted quite extensively in Denmark. We have also quite a new opera house in Copenhagen, where lots of German famous operas are being sung, and there's a very close cultural cooperation in the frame of EU, in all kinds of connections between big cities, Copenhagen and Berlin, Copenhagen and Hamburg, and so on. More concrete, I don't have it, sort of. Yes.
May I add one thing
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Well, this was a very conscious thing from the West German part, from the very beginning. And this was more a civil society thing, because we have to see this in stages. The World War ended 45. The two Germanys were created 48, 49. And you have to see it first stage through the 50s and 60s, where Germany, the German industry and German cultural life did everything in order to remind both those who were victims and those who had not participated in the war that here is Germany, we are good again. The bad guys are gone. Here we are again, and here we go with a full spectrum of music, arts, theater, and so on. And this was going on. But then from around 1970, there is a new period where one generation is gone, and the whole world starts knowing that Germany is now doing this national therapy I was talking about. So there was not really that direct need anymore to defend yourself from the crimes of the Second World War.
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim.
Oh, yeah.
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 I came from Norway, so I have a question for you. A group of Norwegian student team, football, were traveled to Denmark, and unfortunately the Danish government sent back the team to Norway back again. And we know Norway and Sweden, sometimes we travel ID card, as they said, legitimation. And we saw these days the police Scandinavian carrying guns. Can you tell me the reason behind this security tight made the Scandinavian today to secure their borders?
Are you talking about security in the airport? Or
Airports or borders or sea? Yeah.
was it a student group from Norway
Yes, yeah.
that was denied access to Denmark?
To enter Denmark. Yes.
I'm surprised.
It happened weeks ago or 1 week ago, I think.
I see. Uh-huh.
Because we saw some Scandinavian police carrying guns, and in Norway sometimes we surprised they are carrying gun and rifles. Police are traveling everywhere.
No, that is not the case. I can tell you that the police in Copenhagen and in Denmark do not have big weapons with them normally. So if they have stopped a special group from Norway, they must have had suspicion that this group was entering with sort of special things in mind. I'm pretty sure. I have never personally seen any big weaponry in entering Denmark, I must say. Not even in foreign numbered cars.
There was an official terrorist threat in Oslo 1 week ago.
Oh.
And the security police, including the airports, may have been informed in advance. So the whole of Oslo was more or less in a emergency situation. Police is everywhere. Fortunately, nothing seems to have happened. But there was a terrorist threat, and this was very official.
Well, I didn't know about that. Thank you very much. There is also in Norway a big terror thing after the murders of Breivik a few years ago. This terror act against the schools in Norway, where he shot dead about 70 people. This was a very, very shocking thing. The man is now in jail, of course, but I think the Norwegians have really sort of seen, we have to be more careful than we used to be. The Norwegians are very very sort of peaceful otherwise, I think. Thank you.
You mentioned the differences between Germans and Danes.
Yes.
And I know that one cannot put it up like that, so I don't want to go into deep arguments or anything. But one thing you mentioned that I thought about was that Germans tend to be more confrontatorial and Danes more peaceful or trying to work for compromises.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking about the political development. And if I take two examples, one could be Ukraine, and the other one when Gaddafi was during the Arabic Spring. There was a vote in the Danish parliament, and I don't know exactly how they did it in Germany, but the interesting differences was that in Denmark, all parties for the first week, from the very left wing to the very right wing, said, yes, we want to bomb Gaddafi with the Americans, and we were very proud about it. After 1 week, one party, the Enhedsliste, or something like Die Linke and the Grüne together, in Germany stopped, but the rest of the parties said yes, we want to continue until we were finished. In Germany, no party from the very left wing to the very right wing wanted to go into war at all. So I don't know what your remarks would be on that, but before you say it, I have a little other comment, just briefly, about I'm a native Dane, but I live now today in Germany, in Berlin, and as I grew up, Denmark we didn't like Germans, you know, even though it seems to be I was originating from Germany, and my mother escaped from here before the war. But we didn't like to speak German and so on. Today I feel that if I want to be free in thought, then the Danes have a tendency to say, if you don't talk the right way, if you don't look the right way, you're not really proper. But here nobody says like that. So I feel free here. But in Denmark, we have a woman called Pia. She's not too busy anymore. But she tends to say, and she even tells the former chief of secret police what he can say and what he can't say. She tells ministers what they can say and what they can't say, and nobody goes up against it. I mean, I don't really dislike her, but I just find it very not a place for me to be. So just to add on to what you said, but otherwise, the first question was the important part. Thank you.
Well, Pia Kjærsgaard is somebody else. She's in the parliament, but she's not representing a very big party, although the party is a little bigger than it used to be. She's not more active in politics. I think to your first remarks, I think the Germans, even in the parliament, do not want wars. They don't want to go to wars. Germany has been fighting 2 world wars and lost both of them. And the new generations in this country are very reluctant to go to war. Mutti is very reluctant to go to war or sell weapons or anything like that. Whereas the Danes maybe have another attitude. Say, I mean, Gaddafi was a bandit, and we have our experiences with people like Adolf. What is the name? Hitler or what? And we say, well, if they're acting like in that direction, we could go and shoot them. This would be my superficial explanations. I understand you're a Dane? Yes. Er du fra København? Ja. Østerbro? Ja. Jeg er også glad for at bo her, men I still think there are, I mean, these examples I told you before about the differences between Danes and Germans and the way they communicate. These are personal experiences that I've done over many, many years here, you know. I'm not saying that all Germans are like that, but these are personal experiences in communicating and working with Germans.
I tend to agree with you down there, both in the analysis of the Germans, but this may be because my wife is an artist, and there is, of course, a very flexible way of looking at things here, but also in the feeling hardly anywhere on this world do I feel so free to have a very open debate, say whatever I can, write whatever I will, etc. And that's a wonderful climate. And then on this war issue, I must quote the former American President George W. Bush, who had a press conference in December 2002. At that time, he was actively planning the Iraq war. And the German Bundeskanzler Schröder was actively against it, as well as the French President Chirac. And at a certain stage, it was a little bit critical and a little bit embarrassing that the Germans didn't want to join. So the president had a press conference, and he got the question, why our old allies, the Germans, why are they not joining your important enterprise here? Well, Bush was a little bit embarrassed first, but then I said, well, you know, the Germans are pacifists. I know anybody looking a little bit back at the history would be rather surprised by such a statement, but it's true. It's true, as you say. It's the present leadership generation of Germany, and of course the coming generations are definitely pacifist. They are against war. They had the right decision. In Iraq, we know what chaos is taking place in Iraq right now because of that war. And they had the right decision in Libya. We know what chaos is now taking place in Libya because of that war. The solution is not always just to shoot down a dictator. You have to have an alternative. Thank you.
To us Scandinavians who live in Berlin, I think it's pretty evident that there's a Scandinavization in the German culture going on right now. Do you think, well, at least I've noticed that there's a lot of Scandinavian influence in music, fashion, culture, whatever. Yeah. Do you think that there might be a similar development of influences of German culture in the Scandinavian countries?
Well, difficult to answer that. When you talk about fashion and lifestyle and whatnot, I think Germans companies are doing quite well in Denmark and in Scandinavia as a whole, but it is mainly other things than maybe fashion or furniture. It's cars, and it's machinery, and aircraft, which are all German specialities. I mean, look at the German car industry. It employs more than 1 million people, I think. So the cultural influence will always be there in Scandinavia. I'm not quite sure how it is in Sweden and Norway, but in Denmark we're open to German music, German theater, German design. Maybe not as much German fashion, because the Danes are very sort of fashion-oriented themselves. I don't agree with all the fashion I see there, but that's another story.
The German culture was always there in the Scandinavian country because there was almost a dependence on German culture. There wouldn't be any orchestras or museums or theaters or hardly any authors without this influence of Germany. All big authors, Scandinavian authors, had to go to Berlin sometime or to Munich and so on. It was always the case. It was a little break just after the war. I said that, but the Germans did everything, as you asked, they did everything in order to re-establish that link. And what has happened in the last few decades is that the Scandinavians is also to some extent showing what they can. And that is the new stuff. And it so happens that Scandinavians, including the Finns, they are very good at design and so on. They have now come here, and particularly here in Berlin, they love it. And they swallow it. Down in Munich, a little bit, it's a little bit more distance, geographical and psychological, to the Nordic countries. But here, the northern part of Germany, no doubt, there's a big success for Nordic culture. But it will still be, shall we say, 70% Germany there, 30% Scandinavia going here. I guess that is the kind of, after all, we have to face it, the big differences in population and economic power.